with an explanation on metaverse, and we're going to continue to talk about this topic and immersive technologies. And so I'd like to call our next speaker, Charlie Fink, excited explainer. He's Forbes tech columnist. I think he will be ready to come on. Online, Charlie, are you there?
Welcome. How are you? Are you ready?
I'm great. It's very early in Los Angeles, and good afternoon to Lisbon.
Oh, but we have good weather too, right? So, let's talk about metaverse.
Sure.
True. Go ahead.
Let me see if I can bring up my presentation here.
Let's see.
So you have something to look at other than me. Pedro gave a great talk. I hope I can offer a suitable follow-up without repeating too much of what he said. All right, well, since we have limited time, maybe I'll get started without my slides. I am a college professor and a writer, and I study the metaverse. I have been at the intersection of entertainment and technology for over 40 years. And I'm happy to share some of my insights with you. I won't dwell too much on my background other than what I already said. I wrote a book called Charlie Fink's Metaverse in 2017. One of the things I say in the introduction of this book is that my experience has given me a filter through which I view this emerging media. Technology succeeds when it takes what we're already doing and makes it much better. Right? No better example than Amazon. We check our smartphones 400 times a day. Why? We're looking for that dopamine hit of human connection. Finally, we always overestimate the short term and underestimate the long term. In the 90s, when I was working in America Online at the beginning of the internet, we thought that our computers would be miniaturized. We didn't know when, we didn't know how. We thought that digital advertising would take over from traditional media. We didn't know when, we didn't know how. Of course, it took 20 years, and now it represents 3/4 of all ad spending online. So there's Charlie Fink's Metaverse from 2017. It was an AR-enabled book, which you read with your smartphone in your hands, and the smartphone recognizes markers, like the cover of the book, of course, like a QR code, if you will, and out pops virtual Charlie to introduce and welcome you to the book. So it was a rather lighthearted look. Metaverse was a metaphor in the title of that book. The book is not about the metaverse as we are talking about it today, but rather about the convergence of technologies that defines immersive computing. So Pedro talked a little bit about Snow Crash and the origin of the word metaverse. It is a made-up word from science fiction, which accounts for a lot of the misunderstandings today because it never really had a definition outside of science fiction. And now, of course, we're all competing to do so. But it was a combination of two words, as you know. And it was elaborated upon by a seminal book called Ready Player One. There was a Steven Spielberg movie and a sequel in the works. The Oasis, in the fiction of this novel, begins as an immersive video game which is so compelling, so easy to use, so good that everybody stopped what they were doing in the metaverse and migrated to this virtual world called the Oasis, and they colonized it as we did the World Wide Web, turning the company that created that game, the fictional Gregarious Games, into the most valuable company in computing. There we go. Obviously, the watershed event for the metaverse was the announcement that Facebook was changing its name. There was an elaborate movie. I'll talk a little about that in a minute, but we were all talking about the metaverse within the industry before then. In fact, in 2000, Matthew Ball, a former Amazon strategy executive turned venture capitalist, wrote what we call the Metaverse Manifesto. And in fact, he has a book on the same topic, although you can find a lot of the content in that book on his website. And it is a very expansive view of the metaverse. And in it, he puts forth some fairly commonly accepted definition that includes some of these qualities that a metaverse ideally would have. First of all, you have a fully embodied presence. You have hands. You are free to move around. You have agency inside this persistent virtual world, which is fully scaled. It is a world scale virtual world of contiguous spaces in real time, of virtual objects which you can own and take with you from world to world, along with your wallet and your smartphone. And there will be ownership of these objects that you take with you from platform to platform. Finally, for there to be truly a world scale metaverse with an unlimited number of participants, which incorporates, by the way, the digital twin of the physical world, much of it in real time, that would be enabled by a meta layer, which would consist of new protocols. Like we have HTML, we would have a HTML for the spatial visual world. Epic Games was talking about the metaverse. Epic owns two assets which might work together to become the most important company and platform in the metaverse. That is called Fortnite. It is a game like the Oasis that has over 350 million players. Now, you don't have much presence in this game because it is a 3D game which you play through a 2D screen, either on your smartphone or on your PC. There is no VR version yet, but Epic says, of course, there will be. The graphics in the game, considering the small number of polygons that they use, is quite extraordinary. Not photorealistic, although that's coming from cloud streaming of games. Next slide. Oh, sorry, pressing the wrong button, as if it were on my computer. So Facebook in October of 2021 changes its name to Meta. Sort of like a lover tattooing the name of the object of their affection on their arm. Mark Zuckerberg changed the name of his company to Meta and launched what we are in the middle of right now, which is the Metaverse Gold Rush, even though there is no real metaverse or a commonly accepted definition of it. Facebook, Zuckerberg's definition, elaborated on in quite a bit of detail in this Meta announcement. It really was a science fiction movie that laid out this spectacular vision for a virtual world somewhat blended with our own world, which we can go seamlessly. Zuck described it as an embodied internet, meaning you have an avatar, the world of the internet or of the metaverse is around you, and you can experience it with other people. And Meta is all their mouth is. They're taking about 25% of the money, the profit that they make annually, and plowing it back into the metaverse. They've committed to spending $10 billion a year. They are rushing all over the world to fill hundreds of engineering positions to address the number of technologies that have to converge together, hardware and software, to create an expansive metaverse. They believe the metaverse, these connected virtual worlds, will primarily be social, although there will be many games within them. The company is acquiring the best developers, the best VR developers. They're working on those protocols that I mentioned earlier, and they are building advanced headsets. So Meta is in an extraordinary position. They hold really the field to themselves, although Sony has made substantial progress with the PlayStation VR. But the metaverse right now belongs to everybody. It is in the eye of the beholder, if you will. I would say it's going to be a decade or more before we have what I call a big M metaverse that unifies everything. There are lots of obstacles to that happening, including international borders. Um, the term metaverse has become genericized. Everybody owns it. Everybody means something different by it. As I said, it is a made-up word from science fiction, so define it as you will. Zuckerberg thinks that you must have presence in the metaverse, presence inside of this simulation, and there are many who do not believe that that's necessary, such as the makers of Sandbox and crypto games like Axie Infinity. But every new technology gets trapped in a hype cycle, and I would not be surprised to see this happen to the metaverse as it happened to VR and in general, all new technologies, right? There's a trigger. We all see it. Writers, venture capitalists, influencers, entrepreneurs, everybody runs on into this shiny new thing. And sometimes in months, often in years, somebody lifts their head up from the fantasy and says, wait, the metaverse doesn't exist yet. And of course, the whole idea of it crashes into a trough of disillusion from which it rises and becomes a consumer product. That's the internet in the 90s or to VR itself in the past decade, right? In 2014, 2015, before the Oculus Rift was released, there were very, very high expectations, unrealistic expectations for VR, which at that time was tethered to a personal computer. It took the release of the Oculus Quest to put the metaverse back on track to become an in fact impactful consumer technology. Timing is everything. I want to tell you a little anecdote about a company called General Magic, which was one of the most exciting technology companies of the early 90s. It spun out of Apple, and they made something called the Communicator, which was a smartphone before people had email addresses and internet connections. So therefore, they were correct about smartphones, but they were almost 20 years too early. And of course, the company did not succeed. But it was the first concept IPO. They raised $100 million from public markets. Some of the other qualities of a metaverse that people are talking about a lot, in addition to presence, the metaverse would be cross-platform, meaning that VR would be the most immersive experience of it, but you would still be able to access it with a browser from a computer, a mobile phone, or a game console. Now, those would not be the same experience as being present. They would lack its power, but they would not lack is utility and convenience. But one thing about cross-platform that I would like to emphasize is just because you can access this virtual world or the metaverse with a traditional computer, you are not having the experience of presence. So arguably, it's just a video game, a 3D world that you navigate through a 2D screen like Second Life. It should be device agnostic, so you can access any part of the simulation with a PC. But what it doesn't mean is things that are not spatial and not 3D and not VR friendly are the metaverse. So my personal interpretation is that you need presence. Obviously, Accenture does not emphasize that, and others in their definition of the metaverse do not emphasize that. But I think that is wrong. Without Facebook's acquisition of Oculus in 2014, we would not be talking about this today. Just period and full stop. So the metaverse has Three aspects that I want to highlight that I believe are its most valuable assets. And of course, the most valuable asset is you and your identity and what you take with you from place to place. The spawn point, where you begin your journey, has incredible importance. It is the equivalent of the desktop. And then we have a very misunderstood part of the metaverse, which is in the process of being developed, called the meta layer. Now, the meta layer will provide a stack of technologies, starting with hardware and software, that improves the network and improves connectivity and speed. 5G doesn't get us to a world where we have tens of thousands of simultaneous participants in the same simulation globally. That is not technically possible today. Meta and others are working on protocols, as I mentioned earlier. The HTML of visual computing, of spatial computing, has not yet been invented. So here's a quick look at the spawn point that Meta is working on. I think this is a really brilliant idea. They have done an awful lot of things right, but $10 billion a year is pretty influential. Spatial computing, or the metaverse, or 3D computing, is the place that we are all going, right? It will be wearable, it will be ubiquitous, it will be hands-free, and it will be experiential. The remote work following the pandemic is now a permanently embedded part of at least knowledge workers, which can work from anywhere through a PC. E-commerce, shopping in the metaverse, virtual malls. These are all things that are going to happen and are in process. A small m metaverse exists today. These are the connected virtual worlds. Certainly, Oculus is building one for the Quest, but there are others, existing ones, VR chat, AltSpace, example of virtual worlds that contain many virtual worlds. And these apps depend on VR, and they depend on apps. So you'll know the true metaverse has arrived when apps and game consoles go away. But in the meantime, we're in small m metaverses, and there will be hundreds of them. So a quick look of who else is working on the metaverse. Pedro touched on this, and let me just say in brief, everyone. Every company of scale is working on the hardware or software part of the metaverse. And they all have slightly different views. I can't break all these down completely, but let me say, right now, the company best positioned to build a metaverse is probably Fortnite, because you can't argue with 350 million users. They're doing social things there like concerts, players have places, social places to gather, and they have a lot of user-generated content. The primacy of user-generated content in the spatial metaverse cannot be understated. The metaverse is going to be built by, yes, big companies like Accenture, but also by lots and lots of individuals and entrepreneurs. The opportunity to build in these virtual worlds and the needs for builders will be unprecedented. But there are these other 3D sites, some of them, again, viewed through 2D screens, some of them optimized for head-mounted displays, that have the potential to be either a big M metaverse eventually, or lots, again, of small m metaverses. The acquisition of Activision by Xbox could lead to things like a World of Warcraft virtual world, which would be in the context of this whole Xbox as metaverse. And as I said earlier, in the true realization of the metaverse in its ideal form, there would be no apps. There would be no gatekeepers. It would be open. So again, we're taking a look at these sites that could be a big M metaverse someday and unify with all the other spatial sites, or it will be very influential and important little m metaverses. But there are a lot of obstacles. Let's not kid ourselves. This is going to take a long time because of the number of obstacles to reach a true big M metaverse. I mentioned infrastructure, the meta layer with those protocols. Apple is clearly not planning to play in the metaverse. There will be competing operating systems as there are today. International borders will affect the metaverse just like they affect the internet. Let's not forget that right now these small m metaverses live on the internet. There is no place else for them to live. The metaverse is the internet today. It aspires to be much more, but for the coming decade, it is the metaverse that we have. I won't go too deeply into the negative aspects that VR and the metaverse could challenge our society with. We have not adapted well to social media. It has been incredibly disruptive in the physical world. And there is every reason to think that VR and spatial computing in the future will have the same assets and liabilities that we have seen in the social platforms, including negative influence, propaganda, and some people who may choose ultimately to live in the metaverse, since you will be able to do everything you do in the physical world there. So what is not the metaverse? I mean, is everything the metaverse? Certainly by some definitions. Let me talk about some aspects of the metaverse. And this is the most confusing part, because at the end of 2021, there was a big movement in crypto, particularly, to say that the metaverse is Web3, which includes crypto and everything blockchain, including NFTs. I mean, it's a nice thought. Anybody can say what they want about the metaverse because it's a made-up word. So I'm not here to argue, just to present some facts that will help enlighten the confusion. So let's talk about Web3 first. Web3 is being used interchangeably with the metaverse, largely by executives at Apple and Metaverse who don't want to advertise the company Meta by saying metaverse. Right? And they're inviting everybody to build with them, but frankly, nobody wants to build the metaverse. Even though it was a branding move that aspirationally hoped to wipe the stink off the Facebook brand, they have brought all of the mistakes that Facebook makes on social media with them to the metaverse. And that is the most problematic part of that company, which I find so exciting and bold. So Web3, it was originally, and is used still many times in the context of Gavin Wood's definition of it, which was an infrastructure based on protocols that dispenses with big gatekeepers and decentralizes the internet. This would be an extremely difficult thing to accomplish. Again, the technology is in the research stage. Cryptocurrency, not the metaverse. Will crypto and blockchain be the basis of the economy in the metaverse, right? One of the qualities of a metaverse would be a functioning economy that allowed builders to get compensated for creating the worlds or the place within any specific metaverse. And everyone will need to do this. There will be competition for these builders, just as there is competition for streaming celebrities today. Cryptocurrency, as it is currently conceived, certainly would be a digital way of doing transactions within the metaverse. But right now, it's very cumbersome and slow and doesn't do microtransactions, which will be the most common form of transactions in the metaverse. You want to visit my place, pay $1, for example. The blockchain would be a horrible, horrible place to do that. There are other technologies that exist, including the Linden dollars, which started in Second Life, which is a minimally frictionless system that can do transactions of $3 or more for a penny or less, which is something that Visa, which is also developing a kind of metaverse currency that might be used across platforms, is trying to do also. Reduce the friction, reduce the commissions or gas fees or transaction fees, and make it totally secure. Great idea, but it probably won't be a whole lot more secure than your credit card, because cryptocurrency, not a good answer. NFTs, simply digital objects that you own and can take from little m metaverse to little m metaverse. It's controlled by a digital wallet. The most best known is the MetaMask wallet, which is part of your browser. But this is not NFTs by themselves, the metaverse. And then finally, virtual land is being sold all over the place, including the Bored Ape Yacht Club. Bored Ape Yacht Club just did a metaverse drop of virtual land, which people paid 5,200 American for each parcel, but they crashed the Ethereum blockchain. There weren't enough miners to service the demand for validation that NFT drop created. There's also deep corruption in this community because they drop NFTs, but they reserve a bunch of this virtual land for their investors who can then resell it. So it's more than a venture investment because it provides incoming operating income that they can manufacture at any time. In fact, that's what Axie Infinity has done to generate the assets, regenerate the assets that were stolen from them by a hacker. So finally, in talking about the metaverse, it's worthwhile to think about it in the context of the changes in the physical world, right? Our society does not stop while we develop the metaverse. In 2030, as hopefully a lot of this infrastructure and these technology pieces come together, we will also have VR way past a critical mass point where it becomes as common as a game engine. Fossil fuels will become renewables. Again, we're living in a different world where education is online, is considered normal, and will be free in many parts of the world. So that you no longer have to live in the middle of a big city to learn how to code. There is a trend will be away from possessions like homes, and instead people will have experiences. But digital possessions will start to take on as much meaning as physical projections. Movies, which are already moving out of the center of popular, will become worlds, right? The movie makers will become world builders. And that trend is already alive. And it is a generalized trend in our society today for things that are made out of atoms to become things that are made out of bits. So how can we prepare for this digital future of the metaverse? Well, frankly, programming and working with computers and game engines in a creator economy is going to be I would say the education that people will need the most to prepare for this world, and that people who can work with those tools will be the employees of the future. And they can be anywhere in the world. Big technology companies like Oracle already have teams working on projects, and they're distributed around the globe, which means those projects can be coded 24 hours a day. We're going to need some kind of governance in the metaverse. People are creating something called DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations that provide some governance by the community. And of course, there is good old regulation. How do you prevent some of the evils that have plagued us in the internet? Well, one would be for everybody to have a true identity, where whether you're wearing a robot costume or not, you are accountable for your actions in the metaverse. And I certainly hope that's the direction that we move, although my friends are libertarians and they all think that I'm crazy and that's impossible. Anyway, I want to thank you for your time. Thanks for listening to me and some of my insights into the growing, poorly defined metaverse. Interesting that Web3 has arisen not as Gavin Wood envisioned it, but rather as another way of saying metaverse without saying the meta company's name. Anyway, thanks everybody. Have a great conference.
Thank you, Professor. It was a pleasure. And thank you for sharing with us your knowledge. Thank you very much. Comigo aqui vou...
I have Maria Margarida Azevedo, responsible for the ADP University, and Luís Bravo Martins, video, president of the APD and augmented and virtual realities. I'm going to start with Luís Bravo Martins in relation to this question that was brought by the professor, raised by the professor and by the METAVERSE Rhapsody. And this question of NRCs, that is, for example, we've seen a number of museums. The Santa Casa de Misericordia is selling a number of works through this system, which is worth a lot of money. But this is how can we buy something that we're never going to see physically? So we're buying. So we have. We're going to buy a piece of sacred art, and we're never going to see it. I'm sorry, but the sound is not very good.
Estas temáticas desta forma, portanto, e com este enfoque. Eu lamento não estar aí convosco, infelizmente há 48 horas regressei a uma realidade diminuída devido a um vírus, daí não estar aí ao vosso lado.
Essa não é uma realidade virtual, não é?
There's a virtual reality, says the lady.
NFTs, de facto, acho muito importante conseguirmos separar aquilo que é o potencial dos NFTs e aquilo que hoje nós vemos no mercado dos NFTs. Ou seja, hoje nós temos uma série de dinâmicas que estão muito próximas da arte, muito próximas de transação de assets que criam, portanto, um mercado que, se formos a ver, até de alguma forma está sobrevalorizado em alguns aspectos, mas o potencial dos NFTs é muito grande. Essencialmente estamos a falar de um contrato. Portanto, e esse contrato vai permitir que não apenas artistas, mas que de uma forma muito ampla nós consigamos ter um acesso não necessariamente apenas a elementos digitais, mas inclusivamente a conseguirmos gerir de uma forma mais eficaz aquilo que nós no fundo encontramos na nossa vida comum, cotidiana. Por exemplo, vamos dizer, num condomínio, alguém poderá haver um berbequim do condomínio e esse berbequim, entretanto, poderá ter anexo um NFT. E o problema deste tipo de coisas é que normalmente nunca ninguém sabe onde é que elas estão e muito rapidamente se perderão. Portanto, através de um NFT será perfeitamente possível saber quem é que no fundo tem o utilizou, quantas vezes é que utilizou, quem é que entretanto fez a manutenção e por aí fora. Portanto, isto para dizer que a dinâmica do metaverso e a aplicação de NFTs.
Once again, if somebody could ask the gentleman to speak directly into a microphone, this would help because it's impossible to follow him with this quality of sound. Thank you.
Também a fita do tempo, ao fim e ao cabo,
So that says, Miriam Margarida, you're responsible for the ADP University, and so which works with the virtual realities. So what do you do specifically? And so, Christina, thank you very much for the invitation. So we're going to the world of people. And so the EDP sort of works in the context of learning, that is teaching people. We've been working with virtual realities since before the pandemic, so it became part of our reality in terms of learning and training. The virtual context, we've seen a number of examples today of the benefits of virtual training, which is centralized, which is more exciting because it can it's more immersive and brings a greater return on what we have learned. So we're in the world, we have to upskill and reskill our staff. And these technologies are linked to this. So very specific examples of what we do today in terms of the more virtual learning and the tools that we use. We are present in 28 countries. We have people all over the world. And we would all like to have the possibility of knowing the reality of our company in live, but it's not always possible. So what we do is replicate examples through virtual reality and enhanced reality. So that is visits to a plant, for example, a physical space. But we have a colleague who's in the United States doing this with somebody who is in Portugal as well. So this is these virtual and more immersive experiences allow us to be together and learn at the end of the day in a more democratic manner. But the disadvantages, well, this is that is a question of adoption. That is, people want to adopt these formats, but this question of it's a virtual reality. So the physical world is still very important in terms of the learning and interaction associated with it. And so this morning we talked about creativity, I believe. And so when we use these technologies in terms of learning, there's a much more positive return than the disadvantages that there may be. Although there may also be risks. I mean, this morning we talk about this in cybersecurity, and Louise, that is the speaker before us, Charlie Fink, talks about the NFT, which have the potential for corruption. There may end up by existing in the approach of this question. So in relation to Portugal, how are we? So we were considered one of the countries that we like these new technologies, for example, to acquire knowledge. How are we in this area? We have excellent technologies, but in terms of professionals, no, but I'm sorry, I can't hear him.
Profissionais de realidade virtual e aumentada a nível mundial, foram identificadas 106 empresas, 106 empresas, a trabalhar tecnologias imersivas em Portugal. E sei que neste momento está a ser realizado um novo report e que já foram identificadas mais de 130. Portanto, há aqui um volume de profissionais muito, muito grande só em tecnologias imersivas a trabalhar por cá.
E que trabalho é que está a ser desenvolvido, sabe?
Sim, portanto...
What work has been developed is varied, yes, but the main area.
Existem várias áreas. Nós, por exemplo, na área de formação e na área de educação...
Training and education. Tourism, health, education, I've already said it, retail, immersive corner. This outside, you're going to see some of it. Some of them there's an example there. There's an agency that published more than 10 applications where it promotes a number of trails in enhanced reality. This was something that is working with this dimension. So it's very interesting with the Bob Shine we've seen in the last 2 years. She's extremely interesting. But there's a lot of talent being created. We must remember that the social networks have brought great changes in the media and for democracies, because for the freedom, by many considered extreme freedom, because each person's freedom ends when it affects the other person's freedom, and these cycles collide in the social network. So I'm asking you what alterations can bring can metaverse bring? This is going to be one of the main challenges. This is one of the main challenges that metaverse will have. We're talking about amplifying a lot of the problems that we have now. So we're talking about fake news. It's different for us to be able to talk about something we've read. And so it's very different from talking about something we've seen. So if we're talking about something that's going to transform our opinion, to change our reality has a tremendous impact on the construction of our dynamics. The good news is that today we have got lots of time, because metaverse is not just round the corner. Today we have the opportunity of managing to build metaverse, which is going to meet what we want for, sort of satisfy what we want for ourselves. So we can bring anthropologists and others. And structures that can create elements. Maria Margarida. So we have seen the question of digital humans. In terms of virtual reality, does this alter, that is the way, the interaction between different countries, these different virtual visits, does this alter the dynamic of a team? Or can it change, alter the objectives that were established at the beginning of a project? We must have both perspectives. We want people to learn. We don't work alone. So to project our what we want to be in a doll or something, or a cartoon, it's a social aspect is positive. I can personalize the filters that we use in the social networks, but in a professional context, I can project my best image. So from a social point of view, in a team, I have a relationship of what I want to show. We're all on the same standing. We're all represented by the best of us. I think the team dynamics can help, but from the point of view of the relationship, I mean, are we talking about, is that us really, or is that another reality? It's very interesting to see these frontiers about our realities. So to conclude, I would like you to comment on some news that came out a couple of weeks. Kraft Heinz that joined Microsoft to enter Metaverse to solve the problems of the supply chain in the virtual world. So, Louise, what, in your opinion, what is the relevance of this fusion, and what benefits can this multinational of food products transforming into guarantee a supply chain, a more relevant and more effective supply chain? Well, I don't know the case. I'm giving you the news. But there's a great potential in the manufacturing, in the area of manufacturing, and that's where I work professionally for the use of metaverse. because the opportunity of factories to manage, to have a training opportunity of workers in the factories. So it's a great opportunity. I mean, you can simulate a number of conditions and other functions within the factory. It's great. And so, Margarida? Well, I didn't know the case either. So that is when we bring the technical perspective of Microsoft as a company of this nature within the context of the lack of supply that we have seen in recent times. This fusion this merger can create, can show us how we can overcome these problems of lack of breaks in the supply chain, and people will find alternatives quicker in order to resolve these problems. Well, Margarida and Luís Bravo, thank you very much.